Okay, imagine this for a second. You run for office, you win, it's official, you're proclaimed the new governor, you take your oath, you're literally doing the job. But then, months later, you get a call. The Election Commission says, sorry, there's been a recalculation. Turns out you actually lost. It sounds completely made up, right? But that is exactly what happened in Negros Oriental.
So that brings us to the big question, the one that's at the heart of this whole thing. How on earth can you lose an election you have already officially won? This is the puzzle we're going to unpack today. And it's a story all about two very similar names, a pretty specific legal rule, and what happens when the courts try to figure out what voters really wanted long after all the ballots have been counted. All right, let's start with the hard numbers from the May 2022 election. As you can see, Pryde Henry Teves got over 300,000 votes. That gave him a pretty comfortable lead of almost 20,000 votes over the incumbent, Roel Degamo. So the Provincial Board of Canvassers did what you'd expect. They proclaimed Teves the winner. Seemed simple enough. Case closed, right? Well, not even close. See, here's where it gets interesting. The key to this entire saga isn't actually the guy who won, Teves. Nope. It's the two other guys on the ballot, Roel R. Degamo and Ruel G. Degamo. See it? That similarity in their names isn't just a coincidence. It is the entire reason this whole legal battle even happened. So let's break down who we're talking about. On one side, you've got Ruel Degamo, the sitting governor who was running for re-election. And on the other side, you have Gregory Degamo, a candidate who decided just for the 2022 election to run using the name Ruel Degamo on the ballot. Now, Ruel Degamo's team saw this and immediately cried foul. They argued this was a deliberate move to confuse people, and they filed a petition to get this other Ruel disqualified. And that petition was all about this very specific, very powerful idea in Philippine election law, the nuisance candidate. It's basically a rule that's there to protect the integrity of an election. The law defines a nuisance candidate as someone who files, well, not because they actually want to run for office, but to make a mockery of the whole process. Or, and this is the key part here, to deliberately cause confusion among voters because their name is super similar to another candidate's. So the argument was pretty straightforward. They claimed that the name Roel Degamo was picked for one reason and one reason only, to trick voters who were trying to vote for the incumbent, Roel Degamo. The petition basically said, look, this wasn't an accident, this was a calculated strategy to peel off votes, and in doing so, to totally mess with the true will of the people. So how did this all play out? Well, this timeline shows it was a long, drawn-out fight. Remember, Teves was already serving as governor while this whole case was slowly making its way through the system. Then, in September 2022, that's 4 months after the election, the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, finally ruled that yes, Ruel Degamo was a nuisance candidate. And just a month after that, they officially annulled Teves's proclamation. The whole thing finally ended in February 2023 when the Supreme Court had the last word. And this is the crucial part. Declaring someone a nuisance candidate after an election is over, it does more than just kick them out of the race. Under Philippine law, it actually triggers something pretty wild. It means you have to go back and completely recalculate the election results. Let's look at the number that changed absolutely everything. 49,953. That's how many votes the nuisance candidate Ruel Degamo got. Now, usually, those would just be votes for someone who lost. But in this case,
they were about to become the most powerful votes in the entire election.
So, here's the unbelievable twist. The COMELEC ruled that those nearly 50,000 votes were clearly intended for the legitimate Degamo candidate. So what do? They took all of them, every single one, and moved them over to Roel Degamo's column. Just like that, his new grand total jumped to 331,726. And with that one move, the entire election was flipped on its head. With the new vote count, Roel Degamo was suddenly the winner. And Pryde Henry Teves, who had been the governor for months, was out. The winner became the loser, the runner-up became the winner, and not a single new vote was even cast. Now, of course, Pryde Henry Teves fought this. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that his proclamation was final and should stand. But the court disagreed, and they pointed to this core principle. They said, and I'm quoting here, "The will of the electorate in the choice of public officials may not be defeated by technical infirmities." In other words, you can't let a clever trick on the ballot stand in the way of what the voters actually wanted. So the Supreme Court's final decision really boiled down to a few key things. First, they said COMELEC didn't overstep. It acted within its power. Second, and this is the most important part, they backed up the idea that votes for a confusingly named nuisance candidate should go to the legitimate one. They argued this is the only way to honor what the voters actually intended. They also shut down Teves's claim that his rights were violated, saying that in the nuisance case itself, he was really just an observer.
So why does this one election in one province matter so much? Because this case sets a huge precedent. It sends a really loud and clear signal that using lookalike names as a political strategy to split votes just isn't going to fly. It hammers home that the whole point of the system is to figure out the true will of the electorate, and it confirms that COMELEC has the power to fix the results, even if that means kicking out a winner who's already taken office.
Which leaves us with this really interesting and honestly pretty tough question. Is this rule a vital shield for democracy, making sure clever tricks can't cheat the system? Or does it open up a can of worms, creating a new kind of instability where no election is ever truly final until every last legal challenge has been fought, maybe months or even years down the road? It's that classic tension between getting it right and getting it done. And it's a puzzle every democracy has to wrestle with.